A brilliant blue servant statue emerges from a pile of common sand. This is the ancient magic of Egyptian faience. By the end of this journey, you will know the exact step-by-step process of how artisans created these Ushabti figures. We will uncover how a simple mixture of crushed quartz and salts transformed into a dazzling glaze through a secret firing technique. What was the key ingredient that gave these statues their otherworldly color, and why was their creation considered an act of sacred science? What does it take to craft an object meant to last for eternity? That brilliant blue servant was born from a profound and urgent need. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition to another life, one that mirrored their earthly existence in the most demanding way. In this afterlife, the soul was expected to work, toiling in the divine fields of reeds to grow the food needed for eternal sustenance. This was a daunting prospect for any soul, noble or common. Their ingenious solution was the Ushabti. These small figures were far more than mere grave goods. They were magical proxies, substitute workers animated by powerful spells to answer the call when the gods demanded labor. The name itself reveals their purpose. Ushabti means answerer, one who responds. Imagine the profound comfort this belief provided, knowing that a miniature army of loyal servants was interred with you, ready to stand in your place for all eternity. This concept evolved dramatically over the centuries. Initially, in the Middle Kingdom, a single Ushabti might suffice for a noble. But as beliefs became more elaborate and the desire for eternal security grew, so did the number of these figures. By the New Kingdom, it was common for a pharaoh or a high official to be buried with 365 Ushabtis, one for every single day of the year. And to manage this workforce, an overseer Ushabti was added for every group of 10 workers, complete with a whip to signify its authority. These overseers ensured the worker Ushabtis would not shirk their otherworldly duties. The commitment did not stop there. The most elaborate tombs contained a full crew of 401 figures. This staggering number shows how central this belief was to their journey into the afterlife. Each of these figures was inscribed with a specific spell, usually chapter 6 from the Book of the Dead. This incantation was the source of their power. A typical inscription would command the figure, saying, "O Ushabti, if I am called upon, if I am assigned to any duty to be done in the afterlife, you shall answer for me. You shall say, here I am, I will do it." The Ushabti was not a passive statue, it was an activated magical entity. This is why the material of its creation was so vitally important. A simple clay or wood figure might not endure the millennia, but a Faience Ushabti with its stone-like quartz body and impermeable glassy glaze was built for eternity. The Egyptians were not just crafting art, they were engineering a soul's eternal comfort. The very survival of these objects today is a testament to their success, a direct result of the sacred science we are about to unravel. To create a servant for eternity, you need a material that defies time itself. This is the genius of Egyptian faience, a substance that looks like glazed ceramic but is something entirely different and far more clever. It was not true fired clay at all, but a brilliant self-glazing composite. Think of it not as pottery, but as an early form of synthetic stone, a kind of man-made gem. The entire magic of its iconic blue-green glaze happened from the inside out during a single firing, a secret locked within its core components. The primary ingredient was crushed quartz, or in some cases pure desert sand, which is mostly quartz. This provided the solid, stone-like body of the figure. But quartz alone is just sand. It needs a flux to help it fuse together at a lower temperature. This is where the other two ingredients came in. A small amount of lime was added, which acted as a stabilizer. The real secret agent, however, was the alkali. This came from a source like natron, the same salt used in mummification, or from the ashes of burned plants. When this mixture was heated in the kiln, the alkali did something extraordinary. It reacted with the quartz and the heat, causing a thin layer on the surface to melt and transform into a glass. This is the vitreous glaze we see, a shimmering skin of glass that formed automatically. The characteristic blue and green colors came naturally from trace amounts of copper in the mixture, meaning the artisan did not need to paint the glaze on. The color was born from the chemistry of the material itself, emerging from the fire as a perfect, seamless, and eternal coat. This self-glazing property is what made faience so revolutionary. It was a one-step process to create an object of stunning beauty and incredible durability, a perfect vessel for a spell that needed to last forever. This dazzling blue servant began its life not in a workshop but deep within the earth. To create a body for eternity, the ancient artisans sought the purest form of silica they could find. Their primary source was quartz, a mineral harder than steel, which they quarried from specific, revered locations. One of the most important was the Jebel El Amma Ridge, a site just northeast of modern Cairo, whose name literally means the Red Mountain. Here, the quartz was not just a raw material, it was a sacred substance chosen for its brilliance and durability. Workers would extract large, milky white chunks of the rock using heavy stone mauls and chisels made of even harder stone like dolerite. Imagine the sheer physical effort required, the rhythmic pounding echoing through the quarries as they freed the quartz from its ancient bed. Once they had these rough chunks, the real transformation began. Back at the workshop, the artisans used hand-held stone pounders to break the quartz into smaller, gravel-sized pieces. This gravel was then transferred to stone mortars, where it was ground and crushed again and again using stone pestles. This process was relentless, a slow, methodical reduction of rock to powder. The goal was a consistency as fine as cake flour. Why was this so crucial? A coarse, gritty powder would create a weak, porous body that could crack during firing or fail to hold the glaze. But a fine, uniform powder, when mixed with water, would form a smooth plastic paste. This paste was the essential canvas, a blank slate of pure white potential. Only with this perfectly prepared silica base could the magical chemical reaction of the glaze occur evenly across the surface of the Ushabti. Every grain of that powdered quartz was a promise of durability, the first silent step in giving form to a spell meant to last for millennia. With the pure silica powder prepared, the artisans needed the spark of transformation, a substance that could coax the stubborn quartz to melt. This magical ingredient was the flux, and the Egyptians had a brilliant source for it, natron. This naturally occurring salt was harvested from the crusty shores of dry lake beds, most famously from the Wadi Natron northwest of Cairo. Natron was far more than just a chemical for the Egyptians. It was the very salt used to dehydrate and preserve the bodies of the dead for mummification. Using it in faience created a powerful symbolic link. The same substance that preserved the physical body for the afterlife was now being used to create the eternal body of the servant. But natron was not the only option. In some workshops, especially those farther from the natron sources, artisans used plant ash. By burning desert plants like saltwort or glasswort and collecting their ashes, they created a potent, alkaline-rich flux. The chemistry is beautifully simple. When this alkali, whether from natron or plants, is mixed with the crushed quartz and heated, it attacks the stable quartz crystals. It dramatically lowers the melting point of the silica, so that in the heat of a simple wood-fired kiln, the surface of the mixture begins to dissolve and melt. This melted surface, upon cooling, becomes the hard, glossy glaze we see. The trade routes for natron were vital arteries of this ancient industry. Transporting this bulky, hygroscopic salt from the desert lakes to workshops across Egypt required an organized network, highlighting how advanced and interconnected this craft truly was. The choice of flux was not trivial. It directly influenced the final object. Natron, being a purer source of soda, often produced a more brilliant and consistent blue-green glaze when copper was added. Plant ash, which contains varying amounts of lime and potash alongside the soda, could produce a slightly different texture and a wider range of subtle colors, sometimes yielding a more greenish or even brownish hue. This was not a haphazard process. It was a controlled chemical recipe where the choice between a desert salt and the ash of a humble plant could determine the ultimate beauty and efficacy of an eternal servant. But this quartz and alkali mixture was still incomplete, a volatile combination waiting for its anchor. The final, crucial ingredient was a small but vital amount of calcium, typically introduced as lime from crushed limestone or even powdered seashells. This lime was the unsung hero of the entire formula, the stabilizer that prevented a beautiful disaster. Without it, the fired faience body could become dangerously brittle, prone to cracking or even crumbling over time. The calcium worked on a microscopic level, integrating itself into the newly forming glassy matrix. It acted like a strengthening agent, a kind of skeletal structure that gave the material its essential toughness and durability. Think of it as the difference between a piece of hard candy and a piece of tempered glass. Both are hard, but one will shatter with the slightest pressure while the other can withstand significant force. The lime provided that structural integrity, ensuring the Ushabti could survive not just the firing process but the handling, the inscription, and the millennia resting in a tomb. The precise ratio of these three components, the silica, the alkali, and the lime, was the ultimate secret of the craft. This was not a public recipe but a proprietary formula, a chemical blueprint passed down from master to apprentice within a workshop, often over generations. Getting the balance wrong meant failure. Too much alkali and the object would warp or melt into a shapeless blob in the kiln. Too little and the glorious blue glaze would never form. And without the correct amount of lime, the most beautifully glazed figure would be fragile, a temporary servant doomed to break. This was the sacred science, a perfect triangular relationship between earth, fire, and a pinch of stabilizing magic. The magic truly began when these three powders met. Inside a stone or ceramic bowl, the master artisan would carefully combine the snow-white quartz flour, the precious natron salt, and the powdered limestone. This was the moment of alchemy where separate substances were united to become something entirely new. A small amount of water was added, just enough to bind the powders together without making the mixture soupy. The goal was a specific, crucial consistency, something akin to a stiff bread dough or a firm modeling clay. This was not a task for haste. The artisan would knead the mixture thoroughly, working it with their hands for a long time, ensuring every single particle of quartz was intimately coated with the alkali and lime. Can you imagine the focus required? A single dry pocket of unmixed quartz could spell disaster, a weak spot where the glaze would fail to form, leaving a dull, vulnerable patch on the eternal servant. The paste had to be perfectly homogeneous. It needed to be firm enough to hold the intricate shape of an Ushabti during carving, yet plastic enough to be pressed into a mold without cracking. This was the birth of the faience body, a deceptively simple-looking lump of wet sand that held within it the secret of its own brilliant skin, a dormant potential waiting for the kiss of fire to awaken its true nature. With the faience paste perfectly prepared, it was ready to receive its eternal form. The primary tool for this was the mold, a simple yet brilliant invention that allowed for the creation of hundreds of identical servants. These molds were not made of simple clay. They were often crafted from durable pottery or even carefully carved stone, designed to be used again and again. An artisan would take a lump of the firm, damp paste and press it firmly into the hollowed-out cavity of the mold. They would use their thumbs and fingers to work the material into every crevice, ensuring the paste filled the intricate details that defined a Ushabti's features. This was the moment the magical proxy gained its identity. The mold itself was a masterpiece of miniature sculpture, carved in negative to produce the classic mummiform shape, the crossed arms holding symbolic agricultural tools, and the serene, stoic face that would gaze into eternity. After a short time, the paste would shrink slightly as it began to dry, allowing the artisan to carefully extract the delicate greenware figure, a raw and fragile Ushabti now bearing every intended detail. This mold pressing technique was the key to the staggering numbers we find in tombs. A single workshop using a set of master molds could produce a small army of these figures to meet the immense demand from nobles and pharaohs alike. It was a system of sacred mass production where efficiency did not diminish the spiritual power of each individual object. Once freed from its mold, the Ushabti was still far from finished. It was now a blank slate, a servant awaiting its final instructions and the fiery transformation that would give it an indestructible skin of brilliant blue. Yet for the most elite tombs, a mold was far too impersonal. When crafting a servant for a pharaoh or a vizier, the highest level of artistry was demanded, and this meant turning away from the mold to the skilled human hand. Master craftsmen would take that same magical faience paste and begin to sculpt it freehand, coaxing a unique figure into existence from a simple lump of material. This was not a process of pressing and releasing, but one of slow, deliberate creation. Using finely pointed tools made of wood, bone, or reed, the artisan would carve the delicate features of the face, ensuring a noble and individual expression. They would painstakingly shape the crossed arms, carefully rolling thin coils of paste to form the arms before blending them seamlessly into the body. The iconic false beard, a symbol of divinity and status, would be added as a separate piece and attached with a slip of the paste itself. But the true mark of a hand-modeled Ushabti was in its tools. Instead of the generic implements from a mold, a master sculptor would craft specific miniature agricultural tools directly onto the figure. You might see a tiny, perfectly formed basket for carrying seed slung over one shoulder, or a minuscule hoe with a discernible blade clutched in its hands. Some even held detailed models of sacks for grain or yokes for oxen. Each of these additions was a statement. It declared that this was not just another worker from a mass-produced army, but a personalized, high-status proxy made with an investment of time and skill worthy of its eternal owner. The resulting figure possessed a vitality and presence that a molded piece could rarely achieve. The subtle asymmetries, the deeper carved lines of the hieroglyphic inscription, the unique posture, all spoke of a singular artistic vision. These hand-modeled Ushabtis were the masterworks, the eternal servants crafted not just to serve but to honor. With the form of the Ushabti now firm and leather-hard, it was ready to receive its voice. This was not mere decoration, it was the moment of magical activation. Using a fine, sharp stylus, perhaps made of bronze or a hardened reed, a master scribe would begin the delicate work of incising hieroglyphs directly into the figure's damp body. The most common text was a specific spell, Chapter 6 from the Book of the Dead, a command that transformed the inert statue into an animated servant. The inscription typically read, "O Ushabti, if I am called upon, if I am assigned to any duty to be done in the afterlife, you shall answer for me. You shall say, here I am, I will do it." Every single cut of the stylus was critical. A slip of the hand could mar the spell, potentially rendering the Ushabti mute and powerless for eternity. The scribe had to work with immense precision, carving the intricate symbols of birds, owls, and geometric shapes into the narrow space across the Ushabti's legs and torso. This was not a public text for the living to read, it was a private command, a set of operating instructions for the afterlife. Once the spell was perfectly inscribed, the Ushabti was no longer just an object. It was a programmed entity, its purpose etched into its very being, awaiting only the final fiery baptism to seal those words in place forever. This inscribed servant, now bearing its sacred command, was at its most vulnerable. The figure had to dry with painstaking slowness, a process as critical as any spell. Rushing this phase would mean complete disaster. If the moisture trapped inside the faience paste evaporated too quickly, the resulting stress would tear the delicate form apart. Tiny, invisible fissures would snake through the quartz body, weak lines that would widen into catastrophic cracks the moment the figure entered the kiln's intense heat. To prevent this, artisans placed the Ushabtis in shaded, cool areas with a gentle, consistent airflow. They were kept away from direct sunlight, away from drafts, and certainly away from any source of heat. The goal was a uniform departure of water, molecule by molecule, from the entire object at the same rate. This could take days or even weeks, depending on the humidity and the size of the figure. The artisans would patiently monitor the Ushabtis, watching the color change from a dark, wet gray to a pale, bone-dry white. They knew that a single crack now would render all their previous work, from the quarrying to the inscription, utterly useless. This was a test of patience, a final act of reverence before the fire. A perfectly dried Ushabti felt light and hard, like a piece of chalk, its magical spell locked securely within a stable form, ready to face the inferno and emerge reborn in brilliant, eternal blue. The dried Ushabti, pale and chalky, held its final secret just beneath the surface. This was the moment for the glaze to appear, but no brush dipped into colored pigment, no slurry was painted on. The Egyptians achieved their iconic finish through a process of pure chemical wizardry known as efflorescence. It was a self-glazing miracle. Remember that critical mixture of crushed quartz, natron salt, and lime. When water was first added to bind these powders, it did more than just create a workable paste, it dissolved the alkaline salts. Then, as the Ushabti dried over those long, careful days, the water within began its slow journey to the surface, evaporating into the air. But the water did not travel alone. It carried the dissolved salts with it, pulling them upward through the tiny pores between the quartz particles. By the time the figure was completely dry, these salts had crystallized into a fine, sugary crust that coated every single inch of the form. This white, dusty layer was invisible magic, a sleeping glaze waiting for the spark of heat. When the Ushabti was placed into the kiln, the intense fire awakened this crystalline skin. The heat caused the salt crust to melt, fusing directly with the surface layer of quartz to form a continuous, glassy coating. The trace copper in the mixture, which had also migrated to the surface, now bloomed into that famous celestial blue or verdant green. This efflorescence technique meant the glaze was not a separate layer applied on top. It was an integral part of the object's own skin, born from within. This is why the color feels so deep and the surface so seamless, because the glaze and the body are chemically united, fused in the fire into a single, indestructible entity. The servant was now ready for its final transformation, about to step into the flames and be reborn in a coat of eternal color. But another, more mysterious method was also used to cloak these servants in their blue skin. This technique was known as cementation, and it was a form of ancient alchemy. Instead of the glaze forming from within, the artisans would carefully place the dried, bone-white Ushabti figure into a special container, often a lidded clay pot called a saga. They would then completely bury the figure in a fine, dry powder made from the same magical ingredients, the alkali flux, a copper compound for color, and perhaps a little extra crushed quartz. The container was sealed and placed into the heart of the kiln. Inside that sealed, hot, dark space, something incredible happened. As the temperature soared, the powdered mixture surrounding the Ushabti did not melt into a liquid. Instead, it released intense chemical vapors that attacked the surface of the quartz body. These vapors essentially corroded the very surface of the figure, fusing with it to create the glassy glaze in place. It was a transformation by atmosphere, a kind of chemical steam that painted the figure in a coat of brilliant color from the outside in. How does this compare to the efflorescence method we just explored? Efflorescence was an inside job where the glaze ingredients migrated to the surface during drying and then melted. The result was a glaze that felt completely unified with the body, a seamless integration. Cementation, however, produced a glaze that sat more distinctly on top of the body, almost like a separate, thin glass shell. This method gave the artisan a different kind of control, especially over color. By changing the composition of the burial powder, they could achieve more intense or varied hues, yet it was also a far riskier process. If the saga cracked or the powder mixture was uneven, the glaze could come out blotchy, or the figure could even fuse to the container itself, forever trapping the servant meant for eternity. This was the high-stakes alternative, a testament to the Egyptians' relentless experimentation in their quest for eternal perfection. The final, crucial ingredient for that brilliant blue was a whisper of metal. To make the Ushabti's magical skin bloom with its iconic turquoise, the artisans introduced a small but vital amount of a copper compound. This could be the vibrant green mineral malachite, crushed into a fine powder, or a prepared copper oxide. The source of this essential colorant was the legendary mines of the Sinai Peninsula. For centuries, Egyptian expeditions braved the harsh desert to extract turquoise and copper ore from sites like Serabit el-Khadim. The work was grueling, with miners using stone hammers and fire setting to break the ore from the rock in deep, cramped tunnels. Once the raw ore was brought back to the royal workshops, it was carefully processed. Malachite, a copper carbonate, was selected for its purity and crushed just as meticulously as the quartz had been. When this copper powder was mixed into the faience paste or included in the cementation powder, it set the stage for a spectacular chemical performance inside the kiln. As the temperature soared, the copper atoms reacted with the alkaline environment and the silica. They did not simply coat the surface, they became part of the very glassy matrix that was forming. In this hot, oxygen-rich atmosphere, the copper ions absorbed specific wavelengths of light, reflecting back that stunning, saturated blue we so strongly associate with ancient Egypt. It was not a paint, it was a structural color born from a chemical dance within the material itself. This was the final piece of the sacred recipe. The white quartz body, the alkaline flux, the stabilizing lime, and now the celestial copper were all united, ready for their single, fiery baptism. The most critical moment had arrived, the trial by fire. These chalky white figures, now inscribed with their eternal commands, were carefully arranged inside a special oven known as an updraft kiln. Picture a beehive-shaped structure made from thick, fire-resistant clay bricks. At the very bottom was a firebox, a chamber where the artisan would stoke a fire using wood or charcoal. A grate separated this fire from the chamber above where the Ushabti sat. The design was pure genius. Heat and flames would rise from the firebox, swirl around the figures in the main chamber, and then escape through vents in the domed roof, creating a continuous, circulating flow of hot air. This updraft design was key to achieving an even temperature throughout the kiln, ensuring every single Ushabti received the same transformative heat. Controlling this temperature was an art form in itself. There were no digital thermometers, no precise gauges. The master potter relied entirely on experience, watching the color of the fire and the glow from a small peephole. They knew the exact shade of orange-red that meant perfect heat, perhaps around 800 to 900 degrees Celsius. Stoking the fire was a delicate dance. Too much fuel, too much air, and the temperature would soar too high, causing the precious Ushabtis to slump and melt into unrecognizable blobs, their spells lost forever. But if the fire was too timid, the temperature too low, the magical reaction would never occur. The alkaline salts would not melt, the copper would not bloom, and the figures would emerge from the kiln still dull and white, their magical blue skin a failed promise. This was a balance between creation and destruction, an hours-long vigil where the artisan fought to maintain the perfect inferno, all to give these servants their eternal form. The kiln's fire initiated a breathtaking sequence of chemical metamorphosis. The first stage was the water smoking phase, a period of gentle but crucial heat. As the temperature slowly climbed, any remaining traces of moisture trapped deep within the quartz body were forced out as steam. This was a dangerous moment, for if the heat rose too quickly, the escaping steam would explosively shatter the figure from the inside out. The artisan had to be patient, allowing the last ghost of water to depart safely, leaving behind a perfectly dry, porous form ready for its true transformation. Once all moisture was gone, the kiln entered the oxidation phase, the heart of the magical reaction. The temperature soared to its peak, and the atmosphere inside was rich with oxygen from the stoked fire. This was the moment of creation. The crystalline crust of alkali salts that had migrated to the surface during drying suddenly liquefied, melting into a thin, viscous fluid. This fluid attacked the surface of the quartz, dissolving it and beginning to form a glass. At the same time, the copper particles suspended in the matrix awoke. In the oxygen-rich environment, these copper ions dissolved directly into the newly forming glass, becoming an integral part of its structure. They did not simply tint the glaze, they became the glaze, their atomic structure reflecting that specific, celestial blue wavelength of light. The entire surface of the Ushabti was now coated in a shimmering, liquid skin of blue glass, a direct fusion of quartz, alkali, and copper born from the inferno. Then came the final, equally critical stage, the cooling phase. This was not a matter of simply letting the fire die. Cooling had to be controlled with the same precision as heating. If the kiln cooled too rapidly, the thermal shock would cause the glassy skin to crackle into a network of fine lines or crays, compromising its eternal seal. The artisan would slowly reduce the fire, perhaps even block the kiln's vents to slow the temperature drop over many hours. This gradual cooling allowed the glass to anneal, to relax and stabilize, locking the brilliant color and hard, impermeable surface into place forever. The transformation was now complete, a dull, chalky statue reborn as a gleaming, eternal servant. The kiln door opens to reveal a batch of Ushabtis, but not all bear the perfect blue skin of success. Some emerged from the inferno as tragic failures, their forms bearing the silent scars of a process pushed beyond its limits. Cracking was one of the most common and heartbreaking results. If the initial drying phase was rushed, invisible fissures remained within the figure. When subjected to the kiln's intense heat, these tiny flaws expanded into major cracks, sometimes splitting a servant clean in two. Another catastrophic flaw was bloating. If the temperature climbed too high too quickly, gases trapped within the quartz paste would expand violently before the glaze could seal the surface. This created swollen, bubbled disfigurements, turning a serene figure into a melted, unrecognizable mass. Even a perfectly formed figure could be ruined by a poor glaze. Impurities in the quartz or an uneven mix of the paste resulted in a dull, patchy surface where the beautiful blue simply failed to develop, leaving a matte, chalky finish that offered no eternal protection. These failures were not merely discarded, they offer us an honest record of the craft. Archaeologists find these flawed figures in workshop waste pits, telling a story of trial and error that success often hides. Each cracked Ushabti is a lesson in humility, a reminder that for every eternal servant that entered a pharaoh's tomb, countless others fell short, their magic extinguished not by time but by fire. Emerging from the kiln's cool darkness, each Ushabti was scrutinized under the master artisan's keen eye. This final inspection was a matter of spiritual necessity, not just quality control. A figure with a significant crack or a failed glaze was a broken servant, useless for eternity and set aside, but minor imperfections could often be saved. Using a fine abrasive paste, a craftsman might carefully polish away a small blemish on the glaze. For a hand-modeled elite piece, they might even add a final touch of color, applying a painted detail with a mineral pigment mixed with a binder to highlight the hieroglyphs or the tools. Once deemed perfect, the real counting began. The scale of this task was immense. A full set for a noble required 365 worker Ushabtis, one for every single day of the year. But the workforce did not organize itself. For every group of 10 laborers, a single overseer Ushabti was added. These overseers were distinct, often depicted with their arms crossed, not holding tools, but with a whip modeled across their chest to signify their authority. Their spell was different too, commanding them to manage the workers and ensure no one shirked their celestial duties. So the final count in a complete set was not 365 but 401 figures. This was a miniature, eternal civil service ready for deployment. Each figure was then carefully wrapped in linen, a final act of reverence and protection, before being placed in its own specialized wooden box or a dedicated ceramic jar. These containers were often labeled with the name of the deceased and the specific spell, keeping the army of servants organized and ready. The final journey into the tomb was a solemn procession, the last physical act in a long chain of sacred science. As the tomb was sealed, these brilliant blue figures sat in perfect rows, their spells silent, their forms eternal, waiting in the darkness for a call that would never come. The noble's messenger arrived at our workshop with a specific commission, a single Ushabti for the tomb of his master, a man named Khnumhotep. This was not a bulk order for a pharaoh's army, but a deeply personal piece, and the pressure was immense. My master accepted the commission with a solemn nod, for we knew a single flaw would mean failing the noble's eternal soul. Our first task was to gather the sacred ingredients. I was sent to the storeroom for a pouch of the finest quartz flour, ground from pure Jebel el Omar stone until it was as soft as powder. Next, I measured a small portion of natron salt, its white crystals glinting in the sun, the very same salt used by the embalmers to preserve the body this Ushabti would serve. Finally, I added a pinch of powdered limestone, the stabilizer that would give our creation the strength to endure. Mixing the paste was a ritual of focus. I combined the powders in a wide ceramic bowl, adding just enough water from the Nile to bind them into a firm, cool dough. I kneaded it for what felt like an hour, my fingers working to eliminate every last dry pocket until the paste was perfectly smooth and homogeneous. A single imperfection in the mix, and the glaze would bloom unevenly, leaving a weak spot on the servant's eternal skin. My master selected a mold carved from a dense piece of pottery, its cavity shaped into the classic mummiform pose with crossed arms. I pressed the paste firmly into every detail, feeling it take the shape of the face, the hands, the false beard. After a short while, I carefully tipped the mold and a single, pale green Ushabti slid out into my palm, its features crisp and clear, yet fragile as a bird's bone. We set it on a high shelf in the shade to dry, a process we would not rush. For 3 days, we let the desert air slowly pull the moisture from its core, transforming it from a damp gray to a hard, chalky white. Only then, when it was ready, did my master take his sharpened reed stylus. He leaned over the figure, his hand perfectly steady, and began to inscribe the spell directly into its legs. Illuminating each hieroglyph with precision, he carved the words that would give it life. O Ushabti, if the Osiris Khnumhotep is called upon to do any work, you shall answer for him. You shall say, here I am, I will do it. With the name of Khnumhotep now eternally linked to its purpose, the figure was ready for its final, most dangerous journey into the fire. Our workshop was not a quiet, solitary hut, but a bustling hive of organized activity, a small factory for the afterlife. This entire industry was strategically positioned near the great religious and political centers of power, places like Thebes and Memphis. Proximity to the elite and their sprawling necropolises was a matter of pure logistics, ensuring a steady stream of commissions and a short journey to the final resting place. Within these workshops, labor was meticulously divided, a production line of sacred art. One group of workers was dedicated to the heavy, initial labor of crushing and grinding the quartz into that essential fine powder. Another team, often the most senior, was responsible for the alchemy of mixing the paste, guarding the secret ratios of quartz, natron, and lime. The molding of the figures was a specialized task, while the delicate work of incising hieroglyphs fell to a literate scribe who understood the power of the spells he was carving. This division of labor was the engine behind the mass production of Ushabtis, a system that could efficiently produce the hundreds of figures required for a single tomb. But this demand was not limited to pharaohs and viziers. While the elite commissioned hand-modeled masterpieces, the widespread belief in an afterlife filled with labor meant that even the middle class sought these magical servants. For them, workshops produced more affordable, molded versions, sometimes smaller or with less detailed inscriptions. The variation in quality and material found in tombs today is a direct reflection of this ancient economic reality. A wealthy official might have a full set of 401 brilliant blue faience figures, while a scribe or a merchant might be buried with just one or two, perhaps made of simpler painted wood or cruder faience. This was an industry scaling a sacred product to meet a universal human fear, the dread of eternal toil, making the comfort of an answering servant accessible to as many souls as possible. That same fire which birthed Egypt's brilliant blue servants was also burning in kilns across the ancient world. The drive to fuse earth and fire into something beautiful and durable was a global human obsession. Yet the path each civilization took was remarkably different, revealing the unique genius of the Egyptian approach. To the east, in Mesopotamia, artisans were achieving their own glazing marvels. Their signature achievement was not small figures, but immense polychrome glazed bricks used to create breathtaking architectural wonders like the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. Their technique was a world apart from the Egyptian method. The Mesopotamians started with a fully formed, fired clay brick. Then they would paint or pour a prepared glaze slurry onto its surface, a mixture of silica and flux with metallic compounds for color, before firing it a second time to melt that coating onto the brick. This was an application method, adding a colorful skin to a pre-existing body. It was spectacular for large-scale decorative art, but it was a two-step process that created a glaze physically separate from the core material. Meanwhile, in ancient China, a different revolution was brewing with the development of proto-porcelain. Chinese artisans were refining high-fired stoneware and early porcelain, materials prized for their thinness, strength, and resonant ring. Their glazes were often ash-based, sprayed or poured onto the clay body, which would vitrify in a single firing at extremely high temperatures. The focus was on creating a pure, impermeable body first, with the glaze serving as a functional, lustrous seal. So where does Egyptian faience stand in this global picture? It was not a form of pottery at all, but something far more ingenious. The Egyptians skipped the clay body entirely. Their creation was a core of crushed quartz that transformed its own surface into a glaze from the inside out. The self-glazing property of faience through efflorescence or cementation was its revolutionary signature. This was not about applying a glaze, it was about engineering a chemical reaction that birthed the glaze as an integral part of the object itself. This made faience unique. It required only a single firing at a relatively low temperature, yet it produced a material with the visual appeal of precious stone. It was a brilliant shortcut to luxury, a democratization of beauty and magic that allowed for the mass production of sacred objects for eternity. While the Mesopotamians built colossal gates for the gods and the Chinese perfected the art of the vessel, the Egyptians mastered the science of the miniature eternal servant, a technological path as unique and enduring as their civilization itself. Modern science has unlocked the ability to peer directly into the atomic structure of these ancient creations. Archaeologists and materials scientists now employ instruments of astonishing precision to confirm the very recipes we have just explored. A scanning electron microscope, for instance, allows researchers to see the faience at a magnification far beyond the power of any ancient eye. They can observe the individual quartz grains fused together by the glassy glaze, proving that the transformation was an internal chemical reaction, not a surface application. Another powerful tool is X-ray fluorescence. This device beams harmless X-rays at an Ushabti, causing the atoms in its body to emit their own unique fluorescent signature. By reading this energy signature, scientists can determine the exact chemical composition without ever touching the object with a scalpel. They can detect the precise ratios of silica, the specific type of alkali used, and the unmistakable trace of copper that produced the blue. This is not guesswork, it is direct evidence. These analyses have confirmed that different workshops across Egypt had their own subtle variations in the formula, like a secret family recipe passed down through generations. The data even reveals the approximate firing temperature by examining the extent of the glassy phase formation. Was the kiln master a little heavy-handed with the fuel that day? The microstructure of the glaze holds the answer. This scientific detective work closes the loop, transforming our understanding from informed speculation into verified fact. The sacred science of the Egyptians is now a proven chapter in the history of human technology. The magic of faience was far too powerful to be confined to the tomb. While the Ushabti was its most famous servant, this sacred material gave form to an entire universe of divine protection. Amulets were its most widespread application, tiny powerhouses of magic worn by the living and placed on the mummified dead. These were not mere decorations, they were functional spiritual tools. A miniature faience eye of Horus or Wedjat was believed to offer health and wholeness. A tiny scarab beetle, its back often inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, was placed over the heart to prevent it from testifying against the deceased in the final judgment. The brilliant blue-green hue of faience itself was deeply symbolic, representing life-giving water, the lush vegetation of the Nile, and the very heavens. It was the color of creation and resurrection, making it the perfect substance for objects designed to navigate the journey to the afterlife. Faience also scaled up to an architectural level, shimmering on the walls of palaces and temples. Elaborate inlaid tiles, often forming intricate patterns of lotus flowers, papyrus, and geometric designs, adorned the floors and walls of royal complexes. These tiles transformed stone buildings into microcosms of the fertile, divine world, a constant visual reminder of the god's presence. The material was even used for delicate vessels, jewelry, and the dazzling inlay for royal masks and furniture. Every object, from the grandest tile to the smallest amulet, shared the same miraculous property, a self-generated skin of glassy color that promised to last as long as the magic it carried. This technology proved so resilient that it survived the fall of the pharaohs themselves. Through the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, the production of faience objects continued, though the styles and forms evolved to reflect the new blended cultures. Greek-inspired shapes and motifs began to appear alongside traditional Egyptian symbols. The demand for these beautiful, luminous objects never truly faded, a testament to a formula that had achieved a kind of perfection. Then, thousands of years after the first Ushabti was fired, a new obsession ignited. The Napoleonic expeditions into Egypt at the dawn of the 19th century unleashed a wave of Egyptomania across Europe. Suddenly, everything from furniture and jewelry to architecture was infused with stylized sphinxes, pyramids, and lotus motifs. European chemists and potters, captivated by the brilliant blue artifacts appearing in museums and private collections, became obsessed with a single question. How did the ancients achieve this effect? They launched their own experiments, attempting to reverse engineer the Egyptian secret. Factories like Wedgwood in England developed their own versions, marketing Egyptian-inspired jasperware plaques and vases. While these European imitations were beautiful in their own right, they were fundamentally different. They used colored clay bodies with a separate, applied white relief, a two-step process that lacked the chemical unity of true self-glazing faience. The European versions were a tribute, an echo of the original magic, but they never quite captured the soul of the material, that perfect fusion of earth, fire, and faith that made an object eternal. Despite their masterful control, the Egyptians left no written recipes behind. This silence has sparked a vibrant debate among modern scholars. Were the stunningly consistent results across centuries the product of a single, state-mandated formula, or did regional workshops guard their own secret family recipes? Chemical analysis reveals subtle but telling differences. Faience from workshops in Memphis might show a slightly higher lime content, producing a tougher, more durable body, while pieces from Thebes could exhibit a unique ratio of natron to plant ash, yielding a glaze with a distinctive greenish tint. These were not mistakes, but likely intentional variations, the signature of a master artisan or a local tradition passed from one generation to the next. The material itself holds the clues, a silent testament to a decentralized industry of incredible sophistication. How did they achieve such thermal precision without a single gauge? The answer lies in a profound, accumulated wisdom. A master kiln operator knew his craft through every sense. He judged temperature by the color of the glow from the peephole, a deep red for the initial stages, a blazing orange-yellow for the critical transformation. He listened to the fire, its roar telling him if the draft was correct. He might even have used a simple test, perhaps placing a small, sacrificial piece of faience paste on the end of a rod and pulling it out to check its progress. This was a knowledge written in fire and memory, not in manuals. The greatest enigma may not be the how, but the why. Why did this specific, brilliant blue hold such power for them? We know it represented the Nile, the heavens, and life itself. But was the color's magic purely symbolic, or did they believe the copper-infused glaze itself held a tangible, protective energy that would animate the Ushabti? These are the questions that keep the story alive, reminding us that for all we have uncovered, the ancient Egyptian artisan still guards a few of his most profound secrets. That journey from crushed quartz to eternal servant reveals a civilization whose genius was woven from many threads. Their sacred science did not end with faience. It echoed in the monumental stones of the pyramids and the preserved bodies of the pharaohs. Each mystery we unravel, from the chemistry of a glaze to the alignment of a temple, adds another piece to the grand puzzle. What ancient technique should we explore together next? Tell us your thoughts in the comments and join us as we continue our journey into the heart of the ancient world.